The summer of 2024 brought about considerable changes to the Maryland forms. The NAR settlement agreement went into effect, and also Bright MLS instituted a number of policy and procedures changes that needed to be reflected in the new listing agreement. So this video will go through the substantial changes to the exclusive right to sell residential brokerage agreement. As we scroll through the document, the changes will be highlighted. Some of the changes are just changes to vocabulary, but the first substantive change is here in paragraph 7. This extra line here serves a couple of purposes. First, it flags that you now have a new form to use. Guys, in addition to this listing agreement, you shall execute the MLS Disclosures and Residential Seller Options form. This is a form provided by Bright that is required to be signed by all of your real estate clients. Okay. When you go through that form, an additional conversation that we get to have with our sellers is to establish a date upon which the property will be entered into the MLS. So the new MLS rules indicate that you can sign a listing agreement, say on August 1st, but if the seller didn't want to start marketing and didn't want it uploaded into Bright until August 30th, you now have an option to set this new date that the property will be entered into the MLS. So make sure you review this new MLS disclosures form to make sure you understand fully and can explain it to your clients. The next substantive change has to do with the coming soon provision. Bright has decided to change the rules a little bit around this coming soon status. Previously, properties could only be listed as coming soon for up to 21 days. If the status remained beyond the 21st day, it would automatically click into active status. This 21-day deadline has simply been removed by Bright. The new policy is that sellers could opt to have their property listed as coming soon for as long as they want. So this is simply a reflection of the listing agreement that this change has been made in Bright. Bright made another change. They have incorporated a new seller concessions field in the MLS when a listing is published. Importantly, this is an entirely optional field when you're uploading a listing, but still it's an important conversation that we must have with our sellers when signing the listing agreement. So this contemplates a seller that may or may not elect to notify potential buyers that seller is willing to consider requests for seller concessions. So they would be presented with a yes/no option. If they indicate that they will consider requests for closing cost assistance, they would then have an option to indicate at what amount such assistance would be considered. Importantly, this is a non-binding offer, simply that you will consider requests. Okay, so if the seller wishes to put yes, and they say they will be willing to consider requests for up to, let's say, $5,000, that does not lock them in. They are not required to contribute $5,000. The amount will remain negotiable. So the seller will have the option to either check yes or no to indicate their willingness to contribute to closing costs, or they can take no position at all. This section is entirely optional. If they do not wish to publish anything about seller concessions, they can just leave this section blank, but still make sure they initial at the bottom of paragraph F. The next big change has to do with compensation. Now, this is the total amount that the seller shall pay to broker when the property is sold. So let's say you wanted to charge 6% for your services. You would check the first box and you would put 6%. Say you wanted to charge just a flat rate. You could put $10,000. You would check here, just write the number 10,000, and this would be the flat fee that you would be paid for the totality of your services. Or you could do a combination of the two. Let's say you wanted to charge 2.5% and a $495 fee. So you would use the second box if you wanted to charge some combination of a percentage and a flat fee. But remember, we are limited to these three options. We have to be very precise as to what is being charged. And this new form does not invite us to add flowery language or to make it more confusing than it needs to be. The guidance that we've received is that only numbers should be in these fields, in either field 1, field 2, or field 3. Now, similarly to the way the old form operated, you would put the total seller side compensation in paragraph 14, and then paragraph 15 is where you discuss potential compensation to the other side. Again, just like the old form, there's actually two separate fields where you would put in numbers if the seller wishes to compensate the buyer's agent. You would fill out this part to indicate a willingness to pay a potential buyer broker, which is when a buyer agent has properly filled out the buyer agency agreement and is therefore able to act as representative and fiduciary for that buyer. And you're also invited to discuss whether or not you wanted to pay a sub-agent that brought you a ready, willing, and able buyer. A sub-agent, of course, is an agent who is helping a buyer but has not gotten that proper brokerage agreement signed. So sellers, in conjunction with their listing agents, have this conversation if they want to contribute to the buyer side at all. And if so, they can decide whether they want to contribute the same amount to a buyer broker as they would a sub-agent. So just as a purely hypothetical example, if you put 6% as broker's compensation on the listing side, you would have an opportunity to share that with the other side if that is in the best interest of the seller. So if you wanted to share 3% to either a buyer broker or a sub-agent, then the seller would be agreeing that 3% would be paid to the buyer's side. Again, these amounts are entirely negotiable. Now, the final thing to discuss in this compensation section is that there is yet a new form that you will need to fill out. It says broker and seller shall execute this new form, the listing broker's offer of cooperative compensation. So after you fill out section 15, you'll be invited to also fill out this listing broker's offer of cooperative compensation form where the same numbers will need to be plugged in. So if you put 2.5% and 2.5%, if you put 0 and 2.5%, whatever is decided, that should also be reflected in this listing broker's offer of cooperative compensation. And those are the substantial changes. The only other change is that they added a field under the addenda that we can also include that new form we just discussed, the listing broker's offer of cooperative compensation. So it's very important that we become comfortable with these new forms. These new forms capture the changes to Bright policies and procedures And they also keep us compliant with the NAR settlement.